Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Danita Machado, and I'm a producer of public programs here at Brooklyn Museum. And I'm so excited y'all are here to join us for our first installment of our second Sunday series, inspired by Virgil Abloh's social sculpture. I hope you got the chance to go see our exhibition, Figures of Speech. And if you haven't, you'll be able to do so after this talk today. And the social sculpture was inspired by Virgil's vision of creating space for Black creatives and young people. And in that spirit, every second Sunday throughout the run of the exhibition, we're hosting conversations, performances, activations here in the auditorium as well as in the social sculpture. So this first presentation is around the theme of fashion, and we're so thrilled to have three amazing folks in the field and close collaborators, friends of Virgil, Jian DeLeon, Shayne Oliver, and Will Welch. I'll read a little bit about each of them and then welcome them onto the stage. Jian DeLeon is Men's Fashion and Editorial Director at Nordstrom, which is sponsoring today's program. Prior, he was the editorial director at High Snobarity, where he co-hosted several of its podcasts and edited two of its books, The Incomplete High Snobarity Guide to Street Fashion and Culture and The New Luxury. He has contributed to GQ, Complex, The Business of Fashion, and numerous other publications covering the rise of street culture and its various protagonists. Shayne Oliver, born in Minnesota, spent his early childhood in Trinidad and Tobago before moving to Brooklyn during his formative years, before founding Hood by Air in 2006. In 2007, during Hood by Air's hiatus, Oliver founded the multidisciplinary studio Anonymous Club, and over the past decade, Shayne has become known for his distinctive take on street culture, expanding on ideas of power, race, and gender through design, using art, music, and fashion as mediums for his practice. Shayne and Jian will be in conversation moderated by Will Welch, who's the Global Editorial Director of GQ, where he oversees content strategy and vision across GQ's 21 global markets. He is also the editor-in-chief of GQ US, a position he has held since January 2019. Prior to joining GQ in 2007, Welch was deputy editor of the Fader magazine. He lives in Brooklyn. Please welcome Jian, Shayne, and Will.
Hey, everybody.
Hey. Hello.
It is obviously an honor to share the stage with Shayne and Jian, and also just to be invited here today by the Brooklyn Museum. Big thank you to the museum, Danilo and Lauren, appreciate it. Thank you to Antoine Sargent, the curator of Virgil's Figure of Speech show, as well as to Virgil's family, Shannon Abloh. We're gonna talk for a little less than an hour, and then we'll have half an hour for questions at the end. So please feel free to ask anything and everything, these two. And yeah, we're looking forward to it. And I guess really, if you want to interrupt us halfway through and like shout something out, we'll answer those questions as well. I think the more free form we can be, the better. Anything you guys want to add?
No, we don't know when the Air Force Ones are coming out.
Gian might. So obviously, Virgil so often dealt in the realm of ideas, and we are certainly going to get there today. But I wanted to start by asking Shayne, you first, to just share a story about Virgil that somehow tangentially or directly relates to his work as a fashion designer, which is our subject today.
Hey. When we first began working together, it was really, the clothing always came from these elaborate hangout conversations that eventually would would become some sort of design. We would meet in the Mercer lobby and just chill out, you know, hang out, walk around the block, go to Ye's apartment, which was pretty close, do sketches there, listen to records, new records and things of that nature. And then maybe like 3 hours in, begin to then lay down, you know, designs and whatnot. And I think he really wanted to know like what I was obsessed with or what we were both obsessed with at the time, and taking it all in based upon the city and the current space. And I really feel like that was what made it special or so much a commentary to where everything was at, you know? I was talking about it earlier, just like the text chains as well too. And that there were no mood boards, there were no elaborate studio sit-ups and boards happening. It was just purely about how he took conversation and obsession and put it directly into production. That would be like how I would sum up the philosophy from firsthand with him. Obsession and personal interaction. Yeah.
And was the intent of those meetings at the Mercer to collaborate and to create something, or is that more, were you just hanging out and that happened organically, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know why I was meeting with him. I knew it had something to do with, like, I was like, oh yeah, you know, we should just like work on some stuff, maybe some HBA stuff. And it was actually how we got all the graphics done for the first show, well, not the first, but the first official runway show for HBA at Milk Studios through that whole thing. And and so we were like just kind of meeting up to maybe work on that, maybe listen to some music, and it made it, obviously much more easy to just like work towards an idea for something, and then it confirmed that we were gonna do all of these things because that's where our head was at, and people needed to see like this sort of message. Because it's, you know, I think initially what drew us together was that we like messaging within clothing, not necessarily creating like, this looks like a cohesive t-shirt that will fit on in this area of design, or it means this for that. I think it was like literal messages on shirts, and signifiers that created mental alarms for people. And yeah, we connected on that prior, but then we really like synced into that within those that meeting, and then thereafter we began to go to China together and work on other collections like mini drops and whatnot, and yeah. And he only worked, like, we only worked on things when he actually, like, he would, like, zone out when it wasn't about that. And he knew it was kind of like something that was, like, okay, or was for the market. And he actually really wasn't into things that were seemingly in the conversation of fashion. You know, when you're having a meeting for merchandising and all that, he was like, okay, I'm out. You know, this is done. The real work is done here. And I just wanted to say that because I feel like people think that his thing is like pushing, I don't know, product on the masses, but it really was the total opposite, yeah.
Jian, there's a specific story I have to ask you to tell, which is, how many of you have seen the Figures of Speech show downstairs? All right. For those of you who haven't, you will, maybe after this. There is a rug in the show that has a sentence with quotes around it. You won't be surprised to hear. And the sentence comes from Jian. So will you please walk us through the story of how your words got into the exhibition downstairs?
Yeah, so it was 2013. I was an associate editor at Complex, and we had just launched this menswear publication called Four Pins, like a couple of months prior, and Lawrence Schlossman was the editor-in-chief, and I was sort of working in between both Complex and Four Pins at the time. And we had covered RSVP Gallery for some time. They had just recently opened. It's Don C. and Virgil's store in Chicago, and they were about to launch this Pyrex line, like Virgil's first sort of iteration, or the first, foray into apparel and collection. And then, Tumblr was like the de facto source of digital information. It was like Instagram wasn't as popping as it was. Like, it was very much like still the Tumblr generation. And where we saw like the first line sheets of Pyrex, we just saw the prices for everything. And you read the comments for like, on like Hypebeast, and they're just like, I can't believe, it's like X amount for like a Champion short and like a Champion tee, which is why it's, ironic that another closed circle is a lot of the church and state merchandise is also on Champion apparel. But yeah, he was charging $550 for these flannel shirts with Pyrex 23 printed on the back. And then there was a Tumblr thread that's like, I'm pretty sure that these are from Rugby. And it showed, something in stock from Rugby. They were like on clearance for $30. And then the comparing the flannel from the collection. So I actually went to the Rugby store in Union Square at the time while they were closing. Because at the time, Rugby was like being shuttered. And sure enough, yeah, I got one of like the green flannels, and it was literally the same exact flannel that was in the Pyrex line. And I wrote an article originally for Complex that got pushed to Four Pins because one of our editors decided maybe not. It might not be best to ruffle the feathers of someone who worked so closely with Kanye West at the time. So we put it on Four Pins, like this little blog that could. And it was like the first Four Pins article that blew up and just got a lot of, it went viral. And then when Virgil started Off-White a couple years later, the artist Jim Joe had taken the pull quote from that article, like it's highly possible. Virgil took a bunch of Rugby flannels and resold them for an astonishing markup of about 700%. And that was me doing the math from like $30 to $550 or so. And then it was a rug. And that happened on my birthday, I remember, because it was Fashion Week. And then I got a text from Lawrence being like, yo, please tell me you saw the rug. And it was at the first Off-White showroom that they had. And it was like literally what people walked into when they were seeing the new collection.
So
he sent me one, by the way.
Oh, he did?
He did. So I have a version of that rug. He like WhatsApped me. He's like, what's your address? I have like something to send you. This is like years later.
So how do you interpret that move that he made, which is taking you reporting that it appeared that $30 flannels had Pyrex 23 screen printed on the back and were now being sold as a 700% markup. The way he took that and flipped it, what do you interpret that to be? Like, is he turning, was what you wrote a criticism? Was he flipping a criticism on its head? Was it just a statement of fact and he was playing with that within his famous quotation marks? Like, how do you interpret the move?
Yeah, it's like, it's the whole post-rationalization method that, he also used, right? Because in a way, too, when he did Off-White, he was sort of like retroactive continuity for like Pyrex and being like, look, Off-White is like my first real foray into apparel and manufacturing fabrics in Italy. And it was, Pyrex was like almost like an art project at that time. Even though that lookbook for the Youth Will Always Win, you looked at the exhibit, is still, I think, one of the best things that he did early on. But yeah, he had this way of flipping criticism, but also showing how he could use it as inspiration in a way. Like there was that Raf Simons interview where I think it was GQ Style, who Raf was always said he's not doing anything new, and then the next Off-White collection was called Nothing New. So he literally would just take inspiration from everywhere. And I think in retrospect, it was clear that he wasn't really playing by anybody's rules but his own.
So Shayne, in the story that you shared, you hit on collaborating on graphics for HBA and elsewhere with Virgil. And I think it's interesting how, to me, the graphic t-shirt has been one of the most important mediums of our time, an incredible communication method, really like the medium of a generation almost. And there has been, both in your collaboration and individually, great power in what you and Virgil together and separately did with graphics. But I think there are also ways that you each as artists and designers came to be limited by the perception of what a graphic t-shirt represents. And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how you think about graphics now, and perhaps any conversations, literal or through your design, that you had with Virgil about that kind of the gift and the curse of the graphic.
Yeah, graphics. I
mean, I still love that heat map tee, like the sonar radar tee you guys did together.
Yeah, there's because graphic design has been so cultivated by graphic designers, it kind of is this thing where, has this heavy hand on it, where, there's couturiers and the beading, and it's sort of like how I think about a lot of things in general, like the process of design in general, where it's I like to be really far and hands off from it, actually, because you get really obsessed with the actual thing and making it, and then no one actually wants it, because you're the path to making the garment is so strenuous, all this stuff. You're thinking about your schooling and who told you this and that and whatnot. And then by the time I get to the person that needs to see it, it's just not even desirable. Which is kind of what I noticed about people in the generation, just right before mine, which would, it was a weird moment. But, and I think graphics will always be, the t-shirt will always be important because of the need for it, what it does, just in general. As far as graphics are concerned, I think the wordplay is really where it's at, and bringing it back down to that was something that was extremely important during that era for myself, for Virgil, and then they become themselves logos without, because they're speaking towards moods and modes. And the t-shirt is it is a blank, it's a canvas in that way, where it can work with the conversation and then and also take over it in totality. And so yeah, so the importance of that, so I'm just saying that is to me what will shut down how much a t-shirt means going forward, and what it actually means towards Virgil and myself. It's looking at something and being and then it's this, and then it's that, and and I think when you think about it as a canvas and what that means for the body And for an outfit, that's really what it's meant for. And the treatments, and it just gets killed by its own self. You know, graphic designers take themselves very, very seriously. Like they're like,
Graphic design is my passion.
yeah. You know what? Yeah, no. And it's like it's hard when it comes to clothing, right? It's like just giving like people the chance to breathe, and make the message the most important thing. With T-shirts, I think is to me what's gonna keep T-shirts alive. Telfar does like there's even like a moment where Telfar and I were doing things where even just Telfar just using the T-shirt and kind of morphing it into like new shapes and whatnot. And I think that was really interesting because it was not like it wasn't patterned. It was like using the actual structure and the piece to create this shape, opposed to like being like this shape is gonna end up being this like weird tuliped, you know, sort of like what was happening with white lilies, or like, you know, some things in like, you know, like I think that Americans know how to do T-shirts really well. Like I feel like Rick does great things with T-shirts, but it's because the object is the inspiration itself. And the meaning behind just the object is like really what it's all about, and the love behind that, and then really just putting messages towards that. I don't know if that answers anything, but you know, just like the love of the T-shirt, I think is like what I'm kind of moving towards, and using that for just intimate messaging, opposed to like wanting it to be like, this is the bread and butter of my brand, and I'm pushing this initiative with, you know, this T-shirt thing. Because to me, that's not what streetwear actually. Streetwear is like actually every other item but the T-shirt.
Will you say more about that?
Uh-huh.
Will you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, like streetwear is like you going into other sections of clothing that are essentially American or meant for sportswear or other blue-collar activities, and then you bring it into one space and you mix that all together and you make a new style and a new approach. The T-shirt is the thing that you just wear in general because we, as Americans, we just wear a bunch of T-shirts, you know? So like, yeah, so I think, yeah, like tracksuits, you know, jeans, like these are all things that like are not at all used for what they were initially meant to be used for, whereas like fashion actually is, you know, like it's like I'm designing this to go to this either like whatever price bracket we're going towards, or it's like more costuming, you know, which is like I think what makes streetwear, you know, great, because it breaks up the costuming of fashion, but now because they're mixing together now, like fashion elements are actually becoming streetwear because you're pulling from a vintage Valentino blazer or whatever, and now it is streetwear. That is what that is now. So, like, so there is a huge whole definition of that. I just think the T-shirt is like a specific object on its own that evolves with the messaging of whoever is actually genuinely putting an idea or message within that medium.
I love what you say about messaging, wordplay. Obviously, your brand was called Hood by Air, Off-White. These are very loaded ideas. Jian, do you want to pick up the graphic conversation a bit?
Yeah, I feel like, you know, I guess in the economics of like getting a fit off, like the drip to price ratio of like the average T-shirt has been pretty, you know, good, right? It's like a fire T-shirt that might have cost, you know, $4 from a thrift store, or like $50 from a brand, you know, can get you more compliments than like a Loro Piana jacket that might have cost $3,000 or more. And so I think that's why it's like perennially an item people go to. And, you know, even though trends are becoming more decentralized, it's like you can still connect with people over an appreciation of like a similar dope t-shirt.
I wasn't sure if I was going to take us here today, but I think I will. A few years ago, Virgil said streetwear is dead, which he later contextualized further. But would love, you know, Shayne, I think you just probably gave, it's 2022, I've probably heard 2022 different attempts to define what streetwear is and is not, and that was bar none the best one I've ever heard. But would love to hear each of you reflect on when Virgil made that statement, either how you reacted to it, what you thought he was trying to say, or whether you disagree. Just pick it up and take it where you see fit. Jian, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the term streetwear has just become so convoluted, right? It's like what hipster meant in like 2003, right? Where it's like, what does that mean now? Like, what would you call the average Williamsburg resident today, besides, you know, pretty well off? But I think, you know, with streetwear, it's like every generation, right, has what's cool, right? It's like there was the whole Stussy and Union crew, like James Jebbia, Marianne Fusco, Eddie Cruz, and even Chris Gibbs back in the day. And then in the 90s, you know, you had a whole new generation. I think now, like, there's always going to be independent creative crews doing cool shit and gravitating towards each other. Like, we were just in the back, we were talking about Happy 99 online, right? Which was like two people, Dom and Nat, who just opened the shop on Forsyth. And they have such a honed-in aesthetic that's very inspired by like late 90s and early 2000s, like kawaii Japanese culture and video games. And they make sweater vests with like cartoonish characters on them and ringer tees. It's like, but would you classify that as streetwear or just an independent label, right? Or even like what someone like Avenirui has built with Heaven. Would you classify that as a streetwear brand because they also make printables and hoodies? To, you know, like downstairs, Kai, who was leading the teen panels, wearing a Vandy the Pink hat. And Vandy, he's also from Northern Virginia, started his brand on Instagram around like images of burgers and stuff and burger-themed sneakers and just built this world and now has a following. And so I think it's just about, you know, finding and creating community connected through product. I think that's like the core tenet of what streetwear was, you know, and it's like now that Supreme has been sold, and then, you know, there's so many streetwear brands that are now corporate, right, which used to sort of be the death knell. Now it's just sort of makes them more accessible. I think the pendulum will swing where, you know, kids will sort of find the smaller, it's like the modern version of supporting quote unquote artisanal brands is like artisanal t-shirts made by hand and, you know, like screened by somebody like Edgar Gonzalez in Texas or like Saeed Ferguson of All Caps in Philly. I think it's just about people finding each other and creating products in small batches that connect with like-minded folks.
Shayne, streetwear is dead. Yes, no, or maybe?
I was excited when he said that. I took it to me, okay, so there's a thing, there's that angle, which for some reason when I think, okay, I'm gonna go here. When black designers do something, it's immediately like considered this thing, and like for some reason they always think you're cultivating something based upon like what you were talking about, these like groups of whatever. And I think especially at that moment, what he was just saying is like, I'm actually like focusing on design now. The cultivation of all these things that you're connecting me towards, I've passed that, I've surpassed that. No matter how hard you try to put me in this category, it's done, period. The community thing, yeah, it's like a lot of the streetwear brands that have existed have taken those tropes that are again, it's like this insult like to American fashion to me in a way, in general, like just American dressing in general, and like kind of homogenizing it into streetwear, even though like a lot of that stuff is like really like black fashion too, like that has been like put into like taken and like, you know, I mean there's a lot of things that like have been skater, a lot of things that have been black, but a lot of those things are like looking at like fashion from the 80s, 90s and taking a lot of the basis for black looks, and then it became like streetwear, right? So it's like if you're black and you're coming from this specific space and these are things that inspired you, it's like this weird way of saying black fashion without saying it. And I mean, he could have easily said that earlier, you know, because he's not inspired only by that, but I think in that time, like this weird, like street looks and blah, 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 it's like these weird diversions where you're like, okay, sure, you know, it's like, but it's a, you know, and it kind of just like creates this thing where people just don't address that there is a culture that has been taken over, but then also is very inspiring, and it can just directly come from that space without it having to go through all of these meanings. And when you said that, I felt like that was what was happening, for me at least, when I heard that. And, you know, Supreme, you know, that whole thing happening, I feel like Supreme is like a skate brand, you know what I mean? And I just think that people need to start doing that a bit more. Like that's that is, you know, a skate brand that is influenced by hip hop culture and and punk culture, and like talk about it, opposed to just like putting it under this like one bridge or whatever. Because in Europe they create terms for new designers that are coming with things, anti-fashion, anthropo-6, blah blah blah, all these things, and I just think that like streetwear was really like just pushing everyone into this weird blender.
Yeah, it's like if Celine makes like a tie-dye hoodie that's called like a fashion hoodie because it's Eddie Slimane versus, you know, if like Off-White makes like a suit, then it's like a streetwear suit because of the context in which it exists, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, a line being drawn between what is and is not fashion as well.
Right.
Shayne, I thought there was in early 2021, another magazine published a really, I think, powerful, beautiful conversation between you and Virgil. And there was a moment in there where the two of you were talking about being, well, Virgil brought it up about being a black designer and about being an American designer, and how, especially in that moment, which was like we're in the middle of a worldwide racial justice movement, it had become trendy to sort of celebrate black designers, black American designers, but he was talking about the way that that celebration also held within it, like sort of being co-opted and controlled. And you guys were talking about ways to set yourself free from that control. I'm wondering now, it's about a year and a half later, Virgil has obviously passed away. You're pushing your projects forward. How do you see the future for your own projects, or for a new generation of black designers, American designers, black American designers, in relation to that sort of move by the fashion industry?
Yeah, I mean, in the moment, I totally get why a lot of the kids are doing what they're doing, but like, you know, because right now it's the get put on moment for a lot of the kids, you know, so they're like, yeah, girl, call it whatever, you know, and like, you know, really leaning into it, and which I think is great. I don't think that, I mean, are we gonna say white design? Like, you know, just like these things where I'm just like, whoa, what is that? So, quietly I've been just like speaking about this thing, which is like the Black individualism thing, which is why Anonymous Club is called Anonymous Club. At first, I wanted to like be very forward that I'm coming from this space, but I'm like really playing with things that at least we're like trying to push a new narrative at the time. And now it's Anonymous Clubs because it's like the whole team is Black design, and we're like, actually like, don't ask me about where I come from. Don't, because it did become such a thing where the majority of the articles were about like us, it's like reparation, conversation type of thing. The way that I think that pushes forward really has to do with having I'm not sure how much of the system that's needed to have that conversation for Black designers is available in America, or just in general. I think that like even in London does a great job of really supporting the designers, even if they have 5 looks or whatever the case may be. I think that that's where a lot of the kids are coming from here, like as Black designers, because of just like where you come from and how much finances you have and whatnot. So like I'm trying to push this like thing of having everyone calm down and do less looks, so that there's like a little bit more of an even playing field, or just beginning that practice of like, with sustainability and like being like, can everyone bring it in a bit and like focus on like less looks, not a little bit to have a little bit more of a fair playing field, but a lot of times I remember putting more of my culture into it because I knew that it would make the situation more intriguing. And not that I'm not proud of it, but like it's just something that like just I felt like had to be done at the moment. And I'm just gonna only live by example and sort of figure out ways to do that through my own work. As far as like having the answer, I think that it's resources for sure. Like these kids have really great viewpoints and things of that nature, but do they have enough time to take the whole way through Parsons? Like when you're out there and you're like living in specific situations, this is not like obviously there are different like ranges of Black wealth and whatnot, but like Tremaine was saying, it's like we need to be like mediocre first, and I don't think that the Black like the community's there yet for all of that, and to have that perspective where you don't feel like you have to rush or like you have enough time to like learn everything you need to know about fashion and then play off of it, and so that in itself is like a learning experience. Like I've had to, I'm learning that, and like that's like some of the things from my experiences. And now, having gone through the things that I went through with HBA, I think I'm more so building from what I think is like sustainable to keep my sanity and my community healthy while pursuing being a part of the large machine that is fashion. Opposed to like really selling myself as the face to attract a storyline or something like that. So it's like removing that storyline, and actually like having collections that gag people and then revealing that you're Black. I don't know, as much as possible, just in my personal experience. But we can get down there later.
Shayne said he's going to lead by example, and I'm going to follow Shayne's example and lead by example as well. Beautiful. Coming off that, I think one of the most powerful elements of Virgil's practice was, I mean, I think it's come to be known as open source, which was just, we watched him design on Instagram. We got previews of pieces, collections, you know, CADs, drawings, sketches, everything in between, as just a constant feed on the Instagram stories, which was powerful, not only as an education tool for those of us who were watching a sort of paradigm shifting community member in the culture to actually see how he did it, but also, of course, for younger generations, and then now we see it in this historical context as represented by this exhibition, you know, the posthumous version of this exhibition here at the Brooklyn Museum. Like, incredible, game-changing way of working. And Jian is somebody who's paying attention, as you know, you just referenced a couple younger not younger, but emerging brands, new voices in the culture. Can you share a little bit about that practice of Virgil's, of just putting it all out there, and what the impact might be of that for us now and going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think Virgil's practice probably had like the shortest trajectory I've ever seen between like what if to here it is. And you can see that in his notebooks. He's been consistent and intentional since like day one. Like if you look at, you know, his hand styled graffiti that, you know, is still being used in like Off-White today, to, you know, the ideas he wanted to put out. But yeah, his whole thing was, you know, in Tawanda Cheweshe for Alaska, you know, the way he was describing it was just like, use any means available to you to create. Like if you can't screen print, do a handwritten version with marker on a hoodie. And sure enough, there's like a hoodie that Virgil, you know, had worn with marker all over it. And so, you know, Antoine,
by somebody else?
I think it was by him.
Yeah,
you know,
gotcha.
Or it might have been like a, you know, it might have been like a posse cut or whatever, just mad people putting stuff on it. But like, even, you know, Antoine Sargent, when he was curating the exhibit, he was saying for people to pay close attention to the materials used, because, you know, they're pretty accessible materials you can go to Home Depot and make. And that was like a big thing. Like that was his version of being inclusive and accessible, was, you know, you can do it yourself, right? It's like there was that whole era of like DIY customizing shoes. Like he made that a thing. He made writing on your shoes, you know, a big trend, even though it's existed in the past. But he was able to make like that customization aspect, and like taking shoes that, you know, resell for thousands of dollars and cutting a hole in like your Jordan 5s a thing. So it was just about like get out there and create for creation's sake, almost so you get used to it, so that when you sort of focus that energy, whatever you create is going to be better than if you sort of just go off the cuff from, you know, day one to, it's like the Karate Kid, right? He's like Mr. Miyagi. Like you're not just waxing the car, you're not just like painting. It's like it's actually training yourself in the art of what it means to constantly think of how everything influences, you know, your output.
It's interesting to take Shayne's point about the resources, some sort of movement to democratize the resources mixed with a movement to, you know, there's a floor full of design, probably, I don't know, to your point, 40% of which can be made using materials at Home Depot. If those two things can meet in the middle, there could certainly be a lot of magic there. Shayne, as a fellow designer, anything that you would reflect on that open source, just Virgil's stream of Instagram stories?
Yeah, him coming from being an image maker, he, like, you know, he's like so good at communication from the get-go. It's like he was working with Kanye, right? And he was doing like record covers and all this stuff. I think he like really learned the importance of that, because he saw how far and wide that work went because of that intent. And he is the master of it, period. Like, I feel like, especially since that era was so, I don't know, like, you know, he's done so many great album covers, you know, like so many amazing things. And going from that to doing clothing and then kind of reverting back to that, I think like what we were seeing on the Instagram, right? It's like this the kind of like being like, oh, look at this entirely expensive shoot, but like this corner means the most, and that comes from being that sort of person, and really also in the drop of a dime, like learning that skill of sort of entertaining the client or making the client as happy as possible, even if like the circumstances are like whatever. I think he made that like a beautiful craft.
Yeah. He subverted the way people were using Instagram. Like, if you think about people in his position, right? It's like it was a big thing soon come post to like finished product, and he was like, well, what about this 90% of actually doing the work that no one's actually seeing? That's the sort of gray area. He was like, I'm gonna do this part.
And do it every day for years and years
Yes.
and years and years and years. It wasn't a strategy. It was just a organic, like, I don't know, lightning bolts coming from his fingertips. So I have a couple more questions for these guys, but we're coming up on questions from y'all, which I must say is the thing we're the most excited about. So prepare those. Don't be shy. There's a microphone on either side. So we're going to do just like 5 more minutes up here and then get to you guys. If anybody knows they have a question as we're talking here, you're welcome to get up and head to either microphone, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So to wind things down, so many things I would like to ask you guys, but what I'm going to go with is, what did each of you see in his final collections for Off-White and Louis Vuitton in terms of what he was moving towards? Like, we saw what he did. He shifted a paradigm forever. We're seeing that being honored here. But to me, I saw signs of what he was moving towards in those last couple collections. And I would love to hear your interpretation. Again, we are the fashion panel here. And so let's talk about design and where he was headed, the early signs of it. Jian, go first.
I think we were really in the beginning stages of like the tailoring era of what he wanted to do. Like, I think he's had some previous propositions in tailoring, like the side slit pant, the way that he wanted to cut certain top coats. But, you know, in this final collections, there's a specific reason why you see a lot of suiting and you see a lot more of that tailoring. And then, you know, that Off-White Spaceship Earth collection, you see how, you know, he really was intentional in like moving towards couture, moving towards like gowns and dresses. And, you know, I think he wasn't even beginning to scratch the surface of what that looked like. Like, you know, it would be great to see what like formal wear would have looked like coming from him. And then that sort of, you know, kind of hashtag menswear redux through sort of his lens. And I think that's what he was moving towards, was like, you know, we started with graphic tees. So of course he was progressing and matriculating towards just like full on like tucks with tails kind of things.
Shayne?
I can see someone that was moving from using this sort of like what we were talking about, the messaging directly to get like to begin to explain what his point of view was, and to him reverting back to his self and his childhood imagination and what he originally probably all of the things that he was doing prior to those tools for you to understand where he was coming from, actually starting back at the original point. Using Michael Jackson and the kinds of references that he was using for it, and like also, you know, just being like a young black person, like The Wiz is what we all know what that movie means. Like, that's like the first thing that opens your head up, like when you're that age. Or one of the main things that was like publicly, you know, without you having like going into investigating what art history is and all of these sorts of things that he did like within school and etc. I saw him moving into that era of his headspace. That within itself creates, you know, what you initially think about, right? Which is like the initial ideas of fashion, couture detailing, you know, these ideas of imagine if I was in Europe and what would I do there, like these sorts of things, and how would I play on that, and also building on like sneaker obsession, like the things that kids are obsessed with, you know, and really bringing them into a place where they felt actually like refined, because I think that people have tried to do that, but he was really getting into it, into a place where it also wasn't being like refined in a fake, serious, you know, it was like not meant to impress anyone. It was genuinely like what he would wear his childhood had dressing himself now, like to the person that he grew into. And so that was a little bit of tailoring, that was a little bit of this, it was a little bit of that. It's also like just the fascination of being in Paris constantly, and like being around all of like these people that generally use fashion in these ways, and those two like elements colliding into these like really fantastical collections. I mean, yeah, yeah. I would say that's what that felt like for me. I'm trying to remember like if there's anything else that. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I saw happening. Yeah.
So let's do some questions. We'll start over here, and thank you all so much. Please don't be shy.
Is it on? Oh, yeah, okay. So throughout your talk, you use the word obsession a lot. Why would you say it's so important for obsession to be present in the art of storytelling and fashion?
Obsession, to me, is important when you're not coming from the vanguard of fashion. Speaking about fashion, because you need totem poles to bring you back to like where your head is really at, you know? You can be in fashion a lot, and especially when you're around it, you become part of the business, you're hearing a lot, you know what I mean? And those totem poles are really important for you to have so that you're always centered. It's just a centralization thing, and it generally keeps you inspired, because you also get uninspired while being in these groups of people that are all all trying to do the same exact thing, display in the same spaces. And this can be for art, like there's but so many galleries, but so many runways and houses, etc. And you know, and then it also allows you to do what I think Virgil was great at, which is being multidisciplinary. You know, you don't have to rely on those spaces to be grounded. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, it just speaks to the sort of detail-oriented nature that a lot of people in the industry, especially, you know, in menswear, just pay attention to. Like, you don't kind of think about how your pants will fit when you have to like obsess over like finding that perfect pair with like the hem to the waist to like the way that the thigh fits. You know, it's like it's something that sort of takes over your mind in a way.
Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you guys for having this conversation. I appreciate the opportunity. Beyond that, the name Kanye has come up a few times. I was curious if you could discuss kind of the influence and inspiration Kanye gave Virgil, and then vice versa, just considering they worked together for so long with Donda, and then Virgil taking that role at Louis, which Kanye very publicly said that he wanted later on.
You can take this?
Yeah, please jump right in.
We were talking about this downstairs, right? Where like there was a paradigm shift. That was the first big paradigm shift in Virgil's career when people didn't talk about Kanye West creative director in the one or two sentences. And that was a very marked moment for him, right? Where it's like, you didn't need to see, he needed no introduction at a certain point. And that's how, you know, he had sort of built and cemented his own legacy. I mean, I think if we're going to talk about Kanye West's influence on like this unique world of ours, how much time you have kind of thing. But, you know, I definitely think, yeah, like there was a symbiosis there, right? I will say that Virgil traditionally has worked well within larger systems and made them work for him. And I think that is why he was able to accomplish all that he did. You know, he had Alaska. He had architecture within Nike, for example. He had an amazing team within Louis. And not every creative can really flourish or figure out how to work with or make those systems work for them.
Agreed. You know, like when I started HB, I called myself a creative director because I wanted to have some sort of like tone and authority to what was going on so people could listen to me without thinking I was an insane kid. And I think that this situation speaks to that a bit. Like, God, this is scandalous. Kanye wants to be a creative director. Virgil was a creative director. Like, you know, like in the sense where like, God, that sounds crazy. Like, Kanye is a creative and he's always gonna push. He's gonna push. Creative director doesn't necessarily mean that, you know?
You should show people the hat you're wearing.
I know. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's, yeah. I have a creative director hat, and because I find that title so funny in this day and age, because it's sort of like the new like stylist, or you know these terms where you're just like, are you a stylist? You know, do you really know what that means? And like, are you more of a costume designer, and or you know, like an editor? Are you more of an editor? And Kanye will always fight for it to push the hardest. Creative directors are paying attention to all things around them and creating, and the balance could be pushing all of it out the way to create something new, but that is a decision that has to be made with like seeing every single element in front of you and making those decisions in the best way possible. And Virgil is very good at that. Creative director is also a patient job. You know, which, you know, Kanye is, I don't know if, you know, he's gonna bulldoze, you know, he's bulldozing, he's making space for it. And like, that is somebody that you need because like, he creates space, like, it's like, Kanye's gonna create space in general.
Right.
Whereas like Virgil's making space within systems that already pre-exist.
Yeah. Like.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like, to that point too, it's like, Virgil's way of like brute forcing a project through was like, he's like, I want two people that I work with that essentially make it so that Converse and Jordan don't have to approve me doing a Chuck Taylor with like the Jumpman logo kind of thing, which would normally be impossible at a place like Nike.
Please.
Hi. So in Virgil's, can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. In his last academic lecture at CAFA, he titled it The No Discipline Philosophy. And of course, he was multidisciplinary, and he talks about, you know, his music, DJ, architecture, fashion, media. But in that lecture, he talks about fragmenting it and shattering it. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts on like how that really manifested, because clearly his reference points are so strong, going back to history in all these different disciplines, that even though this notion of tourist versus a purist, which is so academic in his sort of manifestation of the way his brain worked, was like he knew his stuff. And he was prolific because he was like Andy Warhol. He could go high, he could go low. He just had such range. So I'm just curious to get your feedback on your insights and perspective on that shattering of all these disciplines.
One of my favorite quotes from Virgil is that he thought the greatest invention in human history was the mixer, basically, because let him DJ, let him switch from one track to another, and I firmly believe that's how his brain worked. His brain was like literally just like a mixer, and he was able to just vacillate between multiple worlds, sometimes focus on one, sometimes focus on another, and always live in between both. So that's how I would think about that.
I think the composition of fashion allows you to see, obviously, this person in front of you, and it tends to be like, there's so many people that actually put into those things to happen, right? And I think there's this thing with him creating this world where he, like, even though you saw it as a look and it's a swag or whatever's in front of you, you weren't really seeing like how much he was cutting off the involvement of that one person, like, and that curation happening. You know what I mean? It's like getting like the tailor to go here with it, and then actually let me call Osiris and let him destroy the look, and then I'm gonna call like Shayne to like give me this sound, or like, I don't know, Venus, for instance. And I think even though that is like sort of normal in the background of fashion, he had a very specific way of doing that that wasn't ever broken down the way that he was doing it. So the shattering was never really like there. He hit it, you know what I mean? The shattering, so that like, cause he was so obsessed with like final product, that shattering wasn't really visible. But it was happening because the kinds of creatives and the kinds of things he was asking of people to do in order to make those specific images had never been done or in the same room the way that they were with him. That's what I would say.
It's like sort of his method of compartmentalization.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I also think there's a pull towards fashion for multidisciplinary practitioners like Virgil or like Shayne here, where it as a discipline, you think about everything that goes into a fashion show, it brings all those things together. So it's like trained as an architect in Virgil's case, moves to a kind of like multidisciplinary creative role within the music industry-ish, I guess, if you were gonna continue to oversimplify and put people in buckets, and then kind of fashion pulls him because it's a place where you can do all of those things. Next question.
Hello, my name is Jordan. I want to thank you guys for just being here and everything.
Thank you, Jordan.
I see how fashion is really like quick. Like there's always a new runway show, you know? Everything's happening quickly. And Shayne, you mentioned something earlier about how you want purposeful designs, smaller collections, kind of like an equal playing field. And I want to know what it means to you to see such like an ever-quickening fashion landscape, and how to combat that and try and maintain your artistic integrity, your purposefulness in such a fast environment.
Great question. I can't wait for this answer.
Oh, well, I mean, I actually think the people that are being the most commercial and bigger brands do it way more, actually, all the time. Like, I think that the younger generations kind of like, are like, I gotta impress, I gotta go, keep going. I think like, for instance, like looking at like Balenciaga, right? It's like, this is not shade again. Like he stopped like making designs a while ago to me. Like, I feel like he found like specific shapes, and he's like continuously getting on that and maybe making like a new shoe, a new this, a new whatever, but he found his niche. And like, he did that in the public. But I think that he's one of the more people that has done that purposefully. Yeah, I think that is one way of like, one person that has done this that is like popular, right? And I'm kind of just waiting for other designers to catch suit onto that, or hiring newer designers in these spaces that allow, like Nike does that, you know what I mean? And I think that there's just like this middle ground of creativity where people like think they have to be like so creative and wow everyone every single season, you know? It's like you have to like begin to like, yeah, like those totem poles, find them for yourselves. It's about the mastering, right? Because eventually people begin to see that like it's the same thing, but it's like done much, much, much better. And I think we need much more of that than we need newer, cooler, you know, rattling things. Because that's like, people can slow down, and there's a product there that is taking its time, that is kind of like creating those totem poles for ourselves. Even though it sounds weird to say that like large brands are doing cooler things, but like in ways, I think like, if you're in schooling right now, it's really about those things, like finding those things that you really, really like. So you're like, no, this is the Jian, and this is what you're gonna get. And the vibe, you can change the vibe around you, you know what I mean? But like you're really focusing on these core ideas that you genuinely, genuinely believe in, because that to me is like a modern designer, you know, like for this world that we live in.
I love when Shayne earlier said, everybody chill out.
Hey, Phil Post here with a question for Shayne. Shayne, what has kept you like the most grounded throughout your career, from working with HBA to a house and now doing Anonymous Club? And also, what brings the most joy when you are being creative? And I guess what brings you the most joy right now?
What brings you the most joy is having some of the old team work with a new team, and seeing that you know, just like that those generations can interact with each other has been really, like, just personally has been really great for me. It's always about the look and everyone kind of gagging in the room and gasping that keeps it going. You know, like that as far as like inspire me like with the business and whatnot. Again, like even those elements I was saying, like using the same elements but reworking them and kind of figuring out the puzzle again really excites me. Yeah, I think that's like, because you already know essentially you already know the person that you're trying to get at, and it's one person that you're hopefully evolving with, you know, and I think it's just about the trickery of finding how to make that exciting again for yourself that just keeps me inspired. Does that make sense?
Hi, I also have a question for Shayne. What I wanted to know is, how important is chaos to you?
Oh yeah, sorry, it was also music too. But I was like, chaos is very important. It's again like kind of based on like what I'm saying is like these core items. You need like to mess them up, you know, like create a bit of drama between these things and really enforce like some sort of like fourth wall breakage, which is why DJing, music, and all of these elements really, that really does it for me. You know, the idea of like, this thing is, I haven't really been seeing this much, and I don't, but the idea of a muse has been lost recently. And I think muses are extremely important because then they put it on and they like totally mess up like how you thought about whatever you were doing. I think that, you know, like the human being there is chaotic to like the perfection of the clothing that you're making in general. You know, it fits someone different and then you're like, whoa, I actually love how that fits on you. Or they're too small for the outfit, and you're like, whoa, I need to size it up in this way, and you know, I love chaos. You know, I love it.
What's going on, everyone? Charles here. So my question is really around this idea of the 3%, right, which is most exemplified in the 10, or even this idea of subversion, which I think Jian mentioned earlier. So for you, Shayne, and really everyone on the panel, I'm curious, how do you find the balance between, quote unquote, copying something and finding something new in an area where new may not really exist, or there may be some version of new that kind of copies something else? So.
I think it stems from the place of fashion's obsession with perfection. I think when you see something that's just perfect, it's really inspiring, and you just want to just cut and paste and add it into the world that you're maybe having some thoughts about. I guess it goes back to like a little bit of that Warhol conversation, right? It's perfection. I don't think like perfection and copying things is that like I don't find a negative in it when it's a part of the the composition, and you know there's a boundary, you know, between like admiration and whatever, but that's also because I just like pushing it or whatever, and I think like, you know, I think it comes from maybe being let down by people that sometimes do that, but I don't really see an issue with it, and I do think that it creates totem poles for people that are genuinely looking for something else as well.
Yeah, I agree. I find that a lot of the mediums that we work in, a lot of the mediums that Virgil worked in are incredibly collaborative. So if there's something really specific that you're inspired by, but you're gonna use it as a jumping off point for all these different people to create something new, I think it's okay to do that without fear that you're somehow going to have been copying the pre-existing thing. Like certainly in my work at GQ, it's so collaborative that that's the case. We can jump off from something that exists. You're always going to land someplace really different. Next question. Hi.
Hello. My name is Lee. My question was, as minorities and queers, I know most of the time we're more open to bringing awareness to our culture and identity through our art form to show others. Getting into fashion and art and the art field, there comes a time where press will label your work as controversial. How do you both, as editors and an artist of many fields, turn the comments on being controversial into motivation?
I mean, I'm dead in the eyes with it at this point. When it comes to that, because I'm just like, okay, sure. And, you know, like I mean, this is not like to any of y'all, because I don't think that it's happened, but like, you know, someone that used to be a writer told me that is just like literally lazy journalism in a lot of different times, you know. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with like maybe the combination of like specific things, right? I think it's like, but which I've kind of been blurring those lines just like for my sake and trying to get somewhere new with what I'm doing. But like, if it's like it's a lookbook, but then the look is going here, and then the music is there. It's like a lot of different things. When it comes to like going back to what you were saying about queer and all of these things, controversial to me just means more education is needed, more listening, because a lot of times I've had articles and people, you know, get hot words from what I'm saying that make it hot, but genuinely not listening to a word I'm saying throughout the interview. And because they're doing a lot of, there's a lot of articles to be written and whatnot. I've come to understand that recently, though. Being controversial, I think I'm too numb at this point to like really care about like that being something, a narrative that I find to be like a negative. But it is very, in the beginning it was discerning. It made me fight harder. It made me go harder. And it made me be more outside of just being, like my messaging to the people that actually like what I'm doing, more direct, opposed to like allowing the press to be the main mouthpiece for what's going on around me.
I also think when a new voice breaks through, it's always perceived as controversial, when in fact what is being experienced is newness. It's important to differentiate those two things, or if you are the one that is being called controversial, there's the opportunity for you to sort of ask how the work is being received, whether that reception is a true reflection of the work as you intended it, and if it is, like, fuck them, keep going, you know? I was going left to right, and okay, it's that way, thanks.
Hi, my name is Memo, I'm from Frankfurt, Germany, and I grew up as a child of Turkish immigrants in Germany, and growing up, I was into football, hip hop, German hip hop, and rap, and I wore like the Nike Total 90s, which are the equivalent to the Jordans in Germany, because we watch soccer and football instead of basketball, and I wore tracksuits and I listened to the music, right? And I was being ridiculed and clowned basically by the, let's call it, non-immigrant society for being like that. And now, 10 years later, or 10 to 15 years later, the whole streetwear and hip hop is in or came in to the mainstream in Germany or Europe, I'd say. And now I'm seeing people that were ridiculing us or clowning, profiting off of that. And my question would be, like, I'm happy, quote unquote, because we made it, but also, like, I'm angry because I was being ridiculed as a child. So how do you guys, or Shay, maybe, I'm sure you see some parallels between here and there. How do you deal with that?
Given that I used to work at High Snob, I can definitely speak to that because, High Snob's headquarters is in Berlin, so I used to go there twice a year. And, I witnessed this firsthand. Like, I was mind blown that, like, Jordans would be sitting at, at the Foot Lockers there.
Yeah.
But then I would leave with a new pair of, like, Air Max Pluses, if I could find a pair.
Yeah.
Right? So, to your point, right, I think that's literally the reason why when you walk into this museum, it says tourist versus purist. Right, it's that conversation between gatekeepers and, to me it's just like, look, if you discover that, if you learn how to ride a bike yesterday, why should you enjoy it any less, right? And if you're like a lifelong cyclist, why you be like, man, I can't believe people are riding bikes now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, that's an opportunity for you to find more people. And that's when you can even flex on them, because then you're like, oh no, you just discovered like the Air Force One, or you just discovered the 95. Like, you haven't even gotten into like the salaries or the whole like Skepta connection with like the big windows, etc.
What are the celeries?
It's like
I'm a tourist.
Huh?
I'm a tourist. What are the celeries?
They just retro them. They look like essentially a cockroach on your foot. That's the best like description. But yeah, that whole sort of like earth tone brown runner, like Nike silhouette. But yeah, I would use it as an opportunity, right? Because then you could go from being like someone who's made fun of to like the go-to source of information around a culture that began as a subculture is now a pop culture.
Yeah. Can I also take Shayne's take on that maybe too?
Yeah, that is a very good point. The anger is there at first for sure, but you do then have to step into a place where you understand that, it's like we call it the look, like knowing the look, getting the look. And you should be building something for yourself where you are at the head of that table. You know what I mean? Like, you know, even just like with HBA and all that stuff, we were the assistants, the interns, and we were like looking at certain designers' things, or working for people that were styling certain designers' things, and we're like, they don't know the look, they don't know the look. You know what I mean? And we're like tired of being those people that were like looking at the look, and you know, they actually have you there because you're in the look. You know what I mean? Like wearing it, actually, you know? And you have to then take the look and like really begin to teach. You have to begin to teach people the look and really be ahead of it. I mean, there is a parallel of like, if you want to be like the cultural version of that, or you really want to be a business person, and like, you know, and you can be both. I'm just saying, like, you know, I almost think that like, like Virgil is like the cultural one, like, you know, in a way, because he's like teaching everyone like all of the layers of it, and it is very tutorial, his work, and yeah, I think you just have to kind of, like, are you trying to be a designer, or?
Yeah, I'm selling vintage, and I'm trying to do
cool. Yeah, I think that you just, you know, I think you probably have the best eye wherever you're at, and you just have to, you know, make sure that you actually have to always be present. You should be there the most, you know, and yeah, show up, like show up.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you.
How's it going? Randy here. My question is, reflecting posthumously on Virgil's work in total, is there a creation or idea that the impact of stands out to you more in retrospect than when it was first released and consumed to the masses?
Like from Virgil's work in general, or?
In total.
That in retrospect.
Yeah, when
you're
now looking back on it.
I mean, to me, it's crazy that he got LV to make varsity jackets in the way that they did, and that they're fire. They're just like collectible pieces, you know, because if anybody that's like been in like that world of like quote unquote like streetwear remembers like the Stussy Tribe jacket and the sort of loaded imagery of, you know, a varsity jacket becoming like such a symbol and like a staple in street culture. But to, you know, get LV to make them in the way that he did with all the patches, like the fact that his last collection had a Black Panther on the back of like a yellow and black varsity, you know, again, so many multiple layers, and it's wild that he made that into like a Grail level fashion piece, or even like the first one with like the Tin Man on the back for like Wizard of Oz. So those to me always stand out.
Just because I like it silly or not silly, but I like it, you know, subversive. I always like get it when he's doing it, so it wasn't anything that specifically he's done. I've been like, huh, and then like thought about it later, but I really liked when Off-White was becoming for the girls. I thought that was really, really interesting, and how women were like just coming at it and like flossing their Off-White purses and heels. I thought that was so cool. And that it was like, that show actually became more important than the men's show. I thought that was really cool. Yeah.
So we're going to take one last question. And if you would bring us home, please.
Yeah, okay. My question is for Jian and Will, actually. So every year, High Snob.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, every year, High Snob, GQ, and I think Gear Patrol publish a paper on the best retailers in the world. So I wanted to know, what role do you think brick and mortar stores play in fashion today?
I mean, I recently left for one, so you know, I think like so we just launched a concept with Virgil that we started. It started as a WhatsApp convo in like 2020, And a lot of it was about the role of brick and mortar retail. Like, in fact, one of the references we talked about was OMA, an organization he worked with often, had a book about like the Harvard Guide to Shopping. And basically, you know, shopping is an increasingly social act. Like, you know, the act of getting dressed up to go to the mall is such like an 80s, 90s trope. And now, you know, Soho, people get fits off just to like walk into shops. And I think, you know, being at Nordstrom, yes, of course, a lot of our sales happen in store, but it's more about like how do you create the context in which people are coming in and engaging with the product, and how, and it's become this symbiotic relationship. And I mean, I still go to shops like on the weekends. You know, I think it is like a thing to do. Like, you still run into people in stores. Like, when I was at High Snob, David Fisher, Mr. Snob, you know, the founder, basically, anytime he would travel, he taught me this trick. He's like, just go to like the illest store in a city and just ask the shop guys where they hang out, and you'll probably get a feel for like what the scene is. And I did that. Like, I did that my first time in like a place like Stockholm. And I think, you know, that's the importance of like retail, is like creating a context and just seeing sort of a product in its intended environment too. So, yeah.
I guess I would just say the internet keeps turning so many industries on their head, and that happened to my business, the magazine business, completely upended, and we're seeing that increasingly after the pandemic with so much retail being driven online. We're seeing the retail business being upended as well, and it gets really interesting because you get the opportunity to see what the various players, whether they be people or leaders or corporate entities, what their values are, how much creativity they have within their industry, their ability to reimagine themselves and continue to be essential. You know, I think if you think about the music industry, it was like the CD and then streaming and then vinyl rose as a result of that, and I think there are parallels to that for the retail business, for the media industry, and so on. Did we do all right? Thank you. Guys, thank you all so much for coming. Can we give a round of applause for the great Virgil Abloh, first and foremost? Jian, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. And Shayne, thank you for doing this and for your continued contributions. It's really an honor to be up here with you. Guys, it's Sunday in August. Hope you have a beautiful afternoon. Thanks again. I don't want to speak for these guys. I can hang out for a minute if anybody didn't get to their questions, but thank you all so much. Danilo?
Thanks, Will. Thanks, Will. Thanks, Shayne. Thanks, Jian. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for your questions. Thank you, Nordstrom, for their sponsorship of this talk today, and to the whole team at Brooklyn Museum and the Abloh team as well. Thanks for your support of this program and of the series, which continues through January. Join us next month on September 11th, where we'll have Bafik and Jim Joe in conversation. So join us for that. You can see the whole series on our website. And after the talk, please go down to Figures of Speech on the first floor. Just show your wristbands on the way in, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you.